Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday afternoon. Hope yours is going well. We've got another Seahawks video to get to today, but first we just hit 2,350 subscribers to the channel. Shout out to all the subscribers, and special tip of the cap goes to the channel members, especially elite channel members HaWKxXA, Brandon, Mikel, Scott, Todd, Rip, Hasher for MVP, VGK Tigers, John Harper, and Salacious Crumb. All right. So now we go into the offensive coordinator candidates that I believe are somewhat less likely to get the position, or guys who I'm currently not thinking of who pop on the radar maybe late in the game. Obviously, this team is taking a look at a lot of different candidates, and it's possible that somebody who none of us have ever even heard of ends up being a guy who gets interviewed a lot down the stretch. So as this series goes on, we'll be taking a look at a wide variety of candidates, including those late bloomers. But for today, we're going to start on guys that I would deem to be less likely to get the job, but still have a reasonable shot at it. So our first name here is a guy who every Seahawks fan should be very familiar with, unless you just started rooting for the team a couple years ago. A guy who had some good times in Seattle, a guy who had some bad times in Seattle, a guy who has done some pretty remarkable things, and a guy who has disappointed us enough to already get fired once. That's right, we're talking about Darrell Bevell. I know. You're probably not very excited right now thinking about hiring Darrell Bevell to be our offensive coordinator, but if we know one thing about Pete, is that it's that he likes to go get his guys. When all else fails, he wants to go get what worked in the past. And Darrell Bevell, for all of his flaws, did work in the past. So I'm telling you, even though I don't think we're going to end up with Bevell, I think there's probably some stuff going on there that just will prevent it from happening. I am telling you right now, it is a possibility. So with that being in mind, let's jump in and take a look at Bevell's resume. And it's a resume we should be relatively familiar with, so I won't spend a ton of time on it. Bevell is currently 51 years old, which is relatively middle-aged for a coach in the NFL. He may have aspirations of being a head coach, and he's a long-shot candidate to be a head coach candidate this year, but I just don't think it's going to happen. So if he comes back, it may not be for very long. He may have aspirations for more than just a coordinator job. Anyway, as for the old resume, in 2010, he was the offensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. This was his final year before coming to Seattle for the start of the Russell Wilson era, as well as the year right before it. The Vikings went 6-10. They had a terrible offense, 17.5 points a game, which was 29th in the NFL, one of the worst offenses in the league. They were 26th in passing yards per game, one of the worst passing offenses in the league. And they had 121 rush yards per game, which was actually top 10, so capable team on the ground, but not a good offense. And then we get to the stuff that we are very familiar with as Seahawks fans. First year he gets here, his QBs are Tavares Jackson and Charlie Whitehurst, and the results are what you can reasonably expect when those are your quarterbacks. The team goes 7-9, they score 20 points a game, 23rd in the league, bad offense, bad passing offense, 22nd, 194 yards per game, same as he had last year in Minnesota. And this year, the running game never really takes off behind, even despite having Marshawn Lynch, they only can run for 110 yards per game, which is 21st in the NFL. So it was an all-around bad offense. And at this point, Bevell hadn't done anything to distinguish himself. And then he gets his quarterback, and the team starts playing at a really high level. And so does the offense for the most part, 11-5 this first year. You guys know the records, 13-3, 12-4, 10-6, 10-5, 9-7. The team won more than they lost every year. And for a few years, they were downright elite. But what about the offense? First year, 26 points a game. The next year, 26 points a game. A top 10 scoring offense without having prolific passing results. 189 pass yards per game, one of the worst passing totals in the league. The year after that, same deal, 26th in the league. The year after that, they're still scoring 25 points a game, which is 8th in the league, so they're still one of the top 10 offenses in scoring. Only passing for 203 yards a game, which is 27th. And then the next year, 26.5 points a game, which is 4th. Top 5 offense, one of the best offenses in football. Only 20th in passing yards per game, 237 yards. And how did we do that? How did we pull that off? 3rd in rushing, 4th in rushing, 1st in rushing, 3rd in rushing. You starting to see why Pete Carroll might have some interest here? For 4 straight years, the Seahawks offense was top 10 in scoring, despite only having a below average to bad passing attack in terms of yards. In terms of efficiency, not so bad, but the passing game took a massive backseat during these 4 years, and the running game absolutely took over the offense. They were top 4 every single year. And if that doesn't get Pete Carroll excited, I don't know what does. It's not what gets me excited, but you can kind of see why Carroll might recall these years fondly. And at that point, basically it was the beginning of the end for the Darrell Bevell era. The next year they did go 10-5, but they only scored 22 points a game, which wasn't even in the top half of the league. Mostly because Wilson got hurt and had no mobility for the first half of the season, more or less. So we were finally top 10 in passing yards per game with 258 yards, and our running game became pathetic overnight, 99 rushing yards per game, 99, not even 100, which was 25th in the league. And then the year that got Bevell fired, I think you can blame a lot of this on Tom Cable, but however you want to slice it, it was still a pretty bad year for the offense, or at least not a very good one. They went 9-7, which is not terrible. 23 points a game, not terrible, but not really good. They were 14th in the league in passing yards and 23rd in the league in rushing yards. So a very lukewarm, tepid, forgettable offensive effort this year from the Seahawks. And it got Bevell out of here. But we don't really need to know about Bevell's time in Seattle. We all saw it. We know what Bevell did when he was here. We know what Bevell did over these 7 years. We didn't pass the ball that much. We ran the ball a lot. We had a lot of success on the ground. We had good offenses. And he overstayed his welcome by a year or two, and it was just time to move on and do something different. Let's take a look at what he did after taking a year off from the NFL. He came back and coached the Detroit Lions, and maybe we can learn something of interest here. And we kind of can, because on the one hand, his offenses in Detroit were pretty bad. This first year for Detroit, they went 3-12. They scored 21 points a game, which is mediocre, 18th in the league. They were top 10 in passing yards with 244, and they were below average in rushing yards with 103 yards per game. This next year, they went 5-11, and Bevell actually took over as the head coach at the end of the season when they fired Matt Patricia. The offense scored a little more, but they were actually ranked lower, so they scored 23.5 points a game, but were only 20th in the league. They were top 10 again in pass yards, but their rushing game fell off a cliff. They only ran for 94 yards a game, which was 30th, one of the worst rushing attacks in the league. So, on the one hand, they became a pass-happy team with Bevell. I mean, they were before because they had Matthew Stafford and they had good receivers, but they were still pass-happy under Bevell. However, they were pretty bad, or at least not good. So I don't know what you want to say about that. When you're a bad team, you're going to pass the ball more, and that's pretty much what happened here. So I don't necessarily believe this old dog has learned new tricks just from a couple years playing on a team with very little running game and Matthew Stafford at quarterback. So overall, I think Bevell's abilities as an offensive coordinator are best defined by what he did in Seattle still. He's clearly an offensive coordinator that wants to run the ball a lot, who feels hamstrung to a certain extent when he can't. And in these couple of seasons where he didn't have much of a running game, the results were not very good. And while technically the team adapted, it didn't seem like they adapted that well. So right then and there, we know what we're getting into if we get Bevell back. We're going to run the ball a lot, and Carroll's going to get exactly what he wants, and we're going to be paying $35 million to Russell Wilson for him to hand the ball off a lot. All right, let's score him on a scale of 1 to 10 in these 4 categories. Number 1 is feasibility, 8 out of 10. I know he has an outside shot of becoming the Lions head coach, which he would obviously prefer over a coordinator position because it's just more prolific. And the fact that we fired him a few years ago might make this a bit of a long shot. I don't know how often you fire somebody and then rehire them a few years later. But otherwise, I think it makes complete sense. He had success in Seattle. Carroll clearly likes him. Carroll likes the way he calls games. Carroll likes his run-pass splits. I think it makes a lot of sense. Fit with Pete Carroll, well, I don't see how you could give this anything other than a 10 out of 10. Darrell Bevell does everything that Carroll wants in terms of NFL offense. He runs the ball a lot, and he loves big plays. Even when Wilson was barely throwing the ball more than a few times a game, we were one of the league leaders in big plays. When we did throw the ball, we went for it. And that was one of the things that undid Bevell as time went on and the offensive line got worse. But that's the stuff that Carroll likes. He likes an offense that runs the ball a lot and takes a few shots a game. So 10 out of 10 feasibility. Fit with the 10 out of 10 fit with Carroll. 10 out of 10 there. However, in terms of fit with the modern NFL, I can only give him a 5 out of 10. He did show a little bit of flexibility in Detroit because the Lions have obviously been pass first these last 2 seasons. But the results were not very good. And for the couple years when the Seahawks kind of had to be pass first, the results were not very good either. The only time he's had good results were the years in which he was able to have an elite run game. So I can't score it lower than a 5 because I feel like he's had good results when he's had a good team. But when he has to go pass first, something just doesn't quite click. And that's the main reason why I wouldn't like this. And that brings us to our overall score of Darrell Bevell. I gave it a 4 out of 10. I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it would be very boring to get Bevell. And it would be very much indicative that Carroll's going to get exactly what he wants in terms of a run-first offense. This signals that we're going to go back to the Marshawn Lynch days, only without the Marshawn Lynch. And I'm sorry, it's hard, number one, it's hard to get a running back who's good enough to carry an offense like that. Even Chris Carson struggles with it because he gets hurt so much, and he's a good running back. Number two, it's a complete waste of our $35 million a year quarterback. And it's really hard for a team to win a Super Bowl when they're paying their QB massive money just to hand the ball off a lot. Now, I'm not going to say he's bad because he has had good results before. He had a top 10 offense for 4 straight seasons in Wilson's first 4 years. There's something to be said for that. And I do remember one stretch of football in 2015, this year, where the offense was as good as I had ever seen it in my life. It was the best Seahawks offense I had seen until maybe this year, the first month plus of the season. And even then, I honestly think the last half of 2015 is the best Seahawks offense I've ever seen. And that was done on the back of Wilson suddenly taking on a much bigger load. So it's not outside the realm of possibility that he could figure something out. But on the whole, if we got Bevell, I would be pretty unhappy. Not furious, but unhappy. And that's going to close out this offensive coordinator profile. We will be coming back tomorrow with more candidates that we are either looking at or should be looking at or may be looking at. And we're going to figure this out. But until then, peace out. Go Hawks. What do you guys think about maybe getting Bevell? Do you think it can happen? And I'll see you guys tonight in stream.